The following podcast contains mature language and discussions that are not suitable for younger audiences. The opinions voiced in this podcast are our own. Listener discretion is advised.
All right, welcome back, folks, to the Strange and Undecided podcast. We're switching things up this week. We're doing it a little different. Today, I'm your host, Patrick, and I'm here with my co-host,
Jarrett.
Hi, Jarrett.
Hey,
Thanks for being here.
no problem.
Today, Jarrett, on the Strange and Undecided podcast, we are reading some horror stories. Are you excited?
I am very excited.
We haven't read these stories beforehand, so when you're hearing them, we're hearing them.
Exactly. All right, let's begin.
Shall we go for it?
We should.
All right. This first story is called 4 a.m. Fire, posted by Avi Gabs. I've been here for about 2 years, and my roommate and I have had very few scary experiences so far, except for this one that happened last summer. It was around 4 in the morning when we were woken from a dead sleep by the fire alarms going off throughout our entire 4-story apartment building. Seeing as this place is occupied mostly by seniors, we figured someone had left the pot on the stove again. I grumbled and blindly grabbed for a blanket. Last time we had a false alarm, I was left shivering and barefoot on the sidewalk waiting for the fire department, and I wasn't about to let that happen again. My roommate and I put on our shoes, I grabbed my phone and keys, and we poked our head out into the hallway. Nothing seemed off, the hall was empty, no one else had come out of their apartments yet. Reluctantly, my roommate and I walked down the hall toward the lobby. We figured our neighbors would soon follow suit. It was only when we went through the lobby and out the front door that we realized something was actually wrong. A handful of people who had already come out of the building were running and shouting about how the building was actually on fire this time. We followed them around to the side of the building as more and more people fled in their pajamas, and to our horror, we saw an apartment on the top floor belching out flames. People were frantic, searching for water, a ladder, anything. Someone remarked that there was a lady who lived in that apartment who had mobility issues and she needed to be rescued now. And where the hell was the fire department? My roommate was quite disturbed by the whole scene, so we decided to go back to the front of the building away from the fire. On our way, we saw a guy jump off his balcony to the ground. He rolled when he landed, but I think it still really hurt, judging from how he sat on the grass and groaned for a while. He was lucky to only be on the second floor. There was chaos, yelling, screaming, an odd mix of panic and disinterest, especially among the senior citizens who didn't want to leave the building because using the stairs was so difficult. The fire department arrived much quicker than they ever had before, seeing as this was a real emergency, and it wasn't long before elderly ladies in the nightgowns were being rescued via ladders and wheeled off to the hospital next door. At one point, the man who lived below the apartment on fire had a screaming episode at one of the landlords, the one that looked like a walking skeleton with an oxygen tank and a scooter. By the time the fire department got everything under control, it was around 6 or 7 a.m. The sun was up and people were beginning their morning commute. The fire department had blocked off our whole street, which must have been a pain, and the entire population of my building sat on the curb in pajamas and blankets. Little kids, old people, broke college kids, the works. The community really pulled together that morning. The public bus service gave us a couple of buses to sit and warm up in instead of standing around on the chilly sidewalk. Paramedics handed out blankets and assessed injuries. The people in the surrounding houses were kind enough to bring us water and snacks. One lady brought a serving tray with mugs of tea from her own kitchen and offered it to anyone she could find. My mom came down to rescue my roommate and I, even though she lived an hour outside of town and hadn't even showered yet. She brought us breakfast and a change of clothes as we didn't know when we'd be allowed back into the building. The most disturbing details of what had just taken place that morning came to us as we were waiting on the bus. Everyone was talking about the fire, of course, but one man had a particularly horrifying detail to add. He heard through the grapevine that the lady whose apartment caught on fire never made it out of the building. Sadly, we suspected as much. with her mobility issues and all, but there was more. The firefighters apparently found her in the hall. She had made it out of her apartment, but couldn't escape the smoke. Whether she died from smoke inhalation or from burns, we aren't sure. But one thing the man said that sticks with me is that someone said that as they stood outside and watched the flames, they heard the woman screaming, "Help me, I'm burning." I've always been afraid of burning to death, and the idea that my neighbor may have had such a horrifying end is deeply disturbing. I know the man who lived below her heard her screaming. He wouldn't stop talking about it. I think he ended up with a form of PTSD from this event, and I don't blame him. We were all brought to a community center where the fire department and emergency response volunteers helped bring some clarity to the situation and told us what to expect. Everyone was very kind and sympathetic to us. Whatever we needed, they provided for us. I think all of that is pretty standard procedure, but still, I was extremely thankful to the kindness of the volunteers, firefighters, paramedics, and Good Samaritans. It was pretty surreal to be in a situation like that. We had almost nothing on us. My roommate hadn't thought to grab her phone, so she had to borrow mine to let her family know she was okay. We had no money, no ID, none of the essentials, and we had no idea how long we would be homeless. I hadn't been so happy to have my mom with me in a long time. I felt like a scared little girl, even if I didn't show it. We were lucky. The fire happened on the opposite end of the building from us. Our unit was totally unaffected, and we were one of the few allowed back into our apartment that same day. The building stunk of smoke for weeks. Even though the fire took place on the 4th floor in a single apartment, the damage was extensive. Even on the ground floor, the walls were blackened with ash. When they attempted to start fixing up the building, they found asbestos in the walls. A few people were forced to move out of their apartments, and we're talking people who had lived there for around 30 years. I remember the night we were allowed back into our apartment. I wanted to box up my most important possessions and keep them in my car, as if I thought the building was going to catch fire again. My home didn't feel safe anymore, and it wouldn't be for several weeks. It would take a long time for us to hear anything about what caused the fire. Last I heard, a space heater was to blame, but I don't know for sure. In the days that followed, the fire was featured on the front page of the local paper. The family that had just lived down the hall from us were featured on the picture. The article spelled out details that I had already heard. It labeled the guy that lived below the fire as a hero for attempting to save the lady upstairs. It was a valiant effort, but there was nothing he could have done without endangering himself. I feel sorry for him, and I often wonder if the guilt keeps him up at night. Sometimes I think about the lady who passed away in this building. I listen to a lot of ghost stories, so I wonder if her spirit haunts this place. Her sudden and horrifying death would be the sort of thing that makes a ghost linger on Earth, wouldn't it? So many things left unfinished. Regardless, I hope she's at peace, and I hope that my neighbors have been able to find some semblance of peace as well. 4 months later, we've regained a sense of normalcy. Things are back to how they were before, if you ignore the orange tarps around the side of the exterior, the restoration vans that come and go every day, and the security guards stationed in the lobby. The damaged wing is still closed while they try and sort out the asbestos situation, but for those of us who live on the other end of the building, things are relatively normal. I hope they stay that way.
My Parents' Haunted House by Twilight Dreamer 87. This is the first time I am posting anything online about this. I am a 31-year-old woman, married, and recently moved back in with my parents due to moving back to the town I grew up. My husband and I are taking our time looking for our own place due to wanting something nice in the area, and that is usually hard to find. This story takes place in my parents' house starting back 10 years ago. A description of the house, for a bit of context. It's a 2-story brick stone house in city limits, but still surrounded by nothing but woods. You have to go through a garage that leads into the kitchen with the first bedroom to your left. Past the kitchen is the main living room, and to the right is the hall that is very open. In this area, you will find the main dining room and second living area, but if you continue straight, you will see the staircase to your left, and even further straight is my parents' bedroom and bathroom. Going up the stairs, you will come to the third living area. Yes, this is a huge house, with 2 sets of French doors side by side that lead to the outside balcony. Going straight, there's a sharp left that leads you to the other 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. This is where the story takes place. The first time I stepped foot into the house, I immediately felt off, like something just wasn't right. I felt a presence, but I didn't know what or who it was. I brushed it off, thinking I was just reading too much into it. I continued to feel this for the next couple of years, and because of this, I didn't much enjoy visiting them. My parents liked to gamble a lot back then, so they would ask me to babysit my baby brother and sister one day on the weekend. My boyfriend, now husband, loved them, so he would always babysit with me. The first few times, I really didn't pay attention to the feeling I would get because we would be so busy playing or eating with the kids. After that, things kind of chilled out, and we would end up watching movies until it was time for us to go to bed. Now, my husband is a freak of nature, lol. It's like he falls asleep the second his eyes are closed. Me, on the other hand, takes me forever to get comfortable enough to wind down my mind. I also don't sleep well, even when I do finally get to sleep. This night was the first time I saw and heard something in this brand new house. In this room, the bed is facing the doorway, but not directly in front of it. With the double doors open, you can see the front of the staircase and all the way down the hallway, as long as the light is on, that is. This night, only one of the hallway lights were on. I was laying in bed with the TV on, but the volume down low so I could hear if one of the kids called me. I was almost asleep when I hear one of my siblings coming down the stairs. I open my eyes a bit and wait for them to get to the bottom, but they never do. I don't think anything of it, close my eyes, and begin to drift off again. A few minutes later, I hear it again. So I open my eyes and wait, but again, they never get to the bottom. This time I sit up and listen, a bit spooked, but nothing I can't handle. I got a bit nervous, but still I go check to see if they are there and maybe they are scared to come all the way down or something. No one is there. Confused and thinking I must be dreaming it up, I go back to bed, this time closing one of the double doors. It was a few hours later, around 2:30 a.m., when I feel like someone is very near to me, as if they are standing next to the bed right in front of me. Usually when I open my eyes, I would see the green glow of the alarm clock on the bedside table, but this time I saw nothing. It was pitch black. I couldn't even see the hallway light on, and the TV had turned off on its own. I felt like I couldn't move. I was awake now and scared to my bones. I was finally able to call out my husband's name loud enough to wake him. He reached over and turned on the light, and right then the scared feeling went away and I was able to move again. I freaked out and started crying. I couldn't begin to explain to him what happened because even if I had, he didn't believe in those things. So I told him I was having a nightmare and asked him to check on the kids. When he came back, he said the kids were fine and got back in bed. With the lights on, I was able to fall back to sleep, but it took me forever. The next day, I told my mom about what had happened, and that's when she told me. She had been hearing footsteps on the stairs at night and even saw someone standing by the door at times. She didn't tell anyone because she did not want to scare the kids. This is when she told me what she had done. She wanted to know what was going on in her house, so she went and bought a voice recorder. One day she decided to use it and went upstairs while everybody was gone. She asked your typical questions of, "Who is here? What do you want? And why are you here?" And then said, "You have passed away and need to go into the light. You are not welcome here." The next day, she decided to leave the recorder in one of the bedrooms upstairs while it was recording for about 4 hours while she was out running errands. I asked if she checked it, and to my surprise, she said that she was too afraid to listen to it alone. I wanted to listen to it. Off we went to the computer and began listening to it after it was uploaded. During the 4 hours she was gone, you could hear something clicking or tapping. Sounds of a drawer opening and closing, but we weren't sure. Then we listened to the part where she was asking questions. Now you could hear a sound that resembled a fan or maybe static throughout the whole thing, so some sounds were indistinguishable. But one sound we did hear chilled us to the core. When she asked, "What do you want?" it gave us an answer. The answer was, "Jamie." It didn't answer any other questions except for this one. I cried immediately. He wasn't having night terrors for no reason. Something was there for him every night. We soon asked a friend to cleanse the house. For a long time, everything has been okay. My brother stopped having night terrors. My mom was able to sleep comfortably, and all was good again. Until now. I have been living in this house for a month and a half. For the last 3 weeks, I have been seeing things everywhere, especially when I am alone. Because of this, I won't stay alone anymore. I get this strong feeling of being watched. I had the feeling of someone pulling on my blanket at night. I think it is time for another cleanse. Oh, and just an FYI, I am the third generation on my mother's side of the family that is able to see spirits. My dad's side of the family has, in the past before I was born, practiced black magic. I don't like speaking to them, and I won't dabble in any of the spiritual stuff most people do. I stay as far away from it as possible, and I recommend that you do too. Even if you are careful, these spirits can haunt for a long time, even after you are gone. So, what do you think of that story?
I think I should be asking you the question because you've had the experience of your old house being cleansed, didn't you?
Actually, when I was in grade 10 at the time, you can tell I'm Canadian calling it grade 10.
Jared didn't tell me this story until fairly recently, like years after this happened. Actually, I think maybe you didn't even know about this. Your mom told you this like years after the fact, right? Is that how it happened?
No, she told me at the time, like afterwards. So, leading up to that, I had a couple friends. It was summer. And again, I was in high school. And there are a lot of kids that lived on my street. So, one of my very close friends, I hung out with him all summer. And there was 3 girls that lived on our street that we all hung out with. So, it was the 5 of us. So, they had the bright idea of playing with a Ouija board. And for some reason, my house was the hangout spot in my basement. So they ended up making their own Ouija boards from scratch. The thing had like ramps and stuff over it. Like it looked like a Monopoly board.
Why the fuck would a Ouija board have ramps?
They decided to take like an artistic approach to it. I don't know. But they brought this.
Ghosts can be creative too, right? They could appreciate it.
The creepiest thing that happened. So again, I didn't fully believe in the paranormal, but I also didn't not believe in it. Like that stuff scared me, like messing with it for the most part. But we tried it out. We messed around with it. Nothing really happened for the first while until one particular day I started asking questions. And this Ouija board, keep in mind, these are questions that nobody in that group knew the answers to. These were questions I only knew the answer to. And it freaked me out because I asked like 5 questions in a row that were these types of questions where nobody knew the answer to it. And and it wasn't just a yes and no answer. These were specific questions and it got it right every single time. I remember asking one particular question that was, what was the name of my grandparents' dog before she passed away? I didn't say she at the time. I said before they passed away, and immediately went to P, E, P, back to P. It was going to spell pepper. And that I lost it. I got up after that. I was like, nope, absolutely not. And I got up and I left because that freaked me out. That was the last straw for me.
Yeah, that's freaky.
There's no way that they would have known the name of that dog because I'd never told anybody that. There's no reason.
How do you know that it wasn't you moving it subconsciously?
I purposely was testing it at this point. I was actively trying to see whether or not this was actually a real thing or not. So somebody else would have had to move that because I know for a fact I didn't put any kind of pressure on that whatsoever. My mom is sensitive towards that kind of stuff. And right after this happened, she came to me like the next day and said that she had the worst horror-filled nightmare that she's had in a long time. And she said she had the worst feeling. I told her what I did. She obviously got mad at me. My mom ended up getting in contact with someone to come out and cleanse the entire house after that point. And she actually put underneath my mom's side of the bed, there was a sheet of salt. And that was supposed to protect her while she slept because she was more vulnerable in the house than anybody else because she was more connected to that side. The strangest thing, though, is my mom told me about a dream she had, and I can't remember if it was right after that or close to it. She said that in her dream, she woke up and she looked, and it's standing at the end of her bed was a figure with no face. It was like a white mask, but it had no features, no nose, no eyes, no mouth. And it was just standing there staring at her. And that happened, according to her, multiple times.
So you're in this house with the demon.
My mom didn't want to scare us, so she didn't tell us at the time. This was after the fact. She said that she had this dream, and it was a recurring dream for a few nights in a row where this figure was just standing and staring at her. After that, nothing. She never had that dream ever again.
I'm glad she didn't tell you this at the time.
That story scared me after the fact, like to my core,
It's scaring me right now.
to the point where I refuse to this day to mess with that stuff. It scared me that badly. And also, I love my mother dearly, and I wouldn't want to do anything to upset her in terms of that. Again, anyone listening to this, if you don't believe in that, that's fine. I'm still skeptical about all this stuff. However,
This is the Strange and Undecided podcast.
exactly. So I'll leave it undecided. You can choose what you want to make of it, but this is my own personal experience. Actually, what I would like is anyone listening to this, please send to our email, strangeandundecided@gmail.com, any of your stories that you'd like featured on the show, and maybe we'll post those with your permission.
Now, our next story, posted by mosaic_unearth, is called White Glowing Eyes. The following is a very true experience. I've never actually wrote this down before, and I don't know if anyone has experienced this too. This happened between 1989 and 1990, and I was about the age of 4 years old. To this day, I still get chills thinking about it, and I wonder if in some way unknown, it changed me. My parents had a house in the inland empire of Southern California, and at the time my brother hadn't been born yet, so I was still the only child. To give you a layout, my parents' house was a 2-story house located in a cul-de-sac. On the bottom floor, there was 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, the living room, and the kitchen. The second floor was the master bedroom and bath. All you could see from the street was the garage and one of the bedroom windows on the bottom floor, and the window of my mom's bedroom on the second floor. To get to the front door, you had to walk along the cement pathway that ran along the side of the house. You had to pass the first bedroom that you can see from the street, then you had to pass the bathroom window, and then another bedroom window, and then you would be at the front door. The backyard was beyond that point. My bedroom at the time was the bedroom next to the front door. Now, for some reason, my blinds weren't completely down to the bottom of the window. There was about a 6-inch gap with nothing covering it. I was pretty young, so I didn't really care much about it. The bed was in the middle of the wall across from my bedroom door, and to the left was the window. According to my mom, this all happened right before midnight. My mother was asleep in her room upstairs, and my dad was a policeman that worked nights in another city. I was fast asleep in my room, and out of nowhere, I suddenly awoke, looking up at the ceiling. I don't know what woke me or if I just popped awake on my own. After my eyes adjusted to the nightlight of my bedroom, I sat up and started looking around my room. All of a sudden, something caught my eye at the window in the gap. First, I thought it was the streetlight reflecting on the window. But I knew for a fact that there was only one streetlight, and what I was looking at was 2 obvious glowing spots that were spaced apart as if on someone's face. Then I thought, is that a cat looking at me? And yes, I vividly remember thinking these things, trying to debunk this at 4 years old. I had remembered then that my cat Chelsea's eyes would reflect at night, but this looked different than that. The cat's eyes would almost have different colors when reflecting. These were 2 very solid, bright, white, glowing eyes, looking straight at me. I just stared at them, frozen stiff, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. I couldn't see a face at all. The eyes were just so bright, nothing else stood out. That void, or quote, face, around the eyes looked blacker than the night. I thought again, well, if this is a cat, how could a cat be big like a person? And why would a cat stand up to stare in my bedroom? The curiosity got me and I went for it. I flipped my covers off, turned my little 4-year-old body towards the window, and put my feet on the floor. This is the moment the creepiest thing happened, and it will forever be burned into my brain. I got off the bed and got to my knees to get a closer look at this so-called cat, when at this very moment, this faceless pair of glowing white eyes begins to slowly and steadily tilt to the side, very similar to Michael Myers in Halloween. Eyes still locked on me, not blinking once. The feeling of dread and fear shot through my body. Completely terrified, I burst into tears immediately and booked it down the hallway, through the living room, and up the stairs to tell my mom. Although I was going as fast as I could, I felt like it took forever. When I got to my mom, I was so upset I couldn't get any words out. Tears were streaming down my face, and my mom was becoming seriously concerned at this point. She was able to calm me down just enough for me to get the words, There's white eyes looking at me through my window on the bottom. Started crying hard. Are you sure? My mom asked. I cried out, yes. She didn't even go down to look, she just called the police. I don't remember the time it took for them to arrive, or what they said, because I finally fell asleep in my mom's bed. I do remember faintly waking up to a knock on the door and my mom going to open it. The cop speaks to her, and I hear her say, okay, thank you, good night, and she shuts the door. Did they find it, Mommy? I asked, half asleep. No, honey, he said they couldn't find anyone. My mom told me softly. It's okay now, just try to go back to sleep. It's safe to say that the next day, my whole window was covered. Years fast forward, and I'm in middle school now. Every now and then I would think about that night. Sometimes I wondered if that moment was real, if those eyes were really there, those unforgettable white eyes. One day a random thought came up and I asked my mom if she remembered that night. She tells me, yes, of course, why? I don't know, just wondering I guess, I said. Then my mom proceeds to say, well, I never told you this, but when the deputy came out that night, he told me they made it a priority to get to our house as soon as they could, because not very long before I had called 911, they received another call from someone else reporting that someone was looking in their window in our same neighborhood. Hearing that sent chills down my spine, and to this day I wonder who or what was looking at me that night.
The Room with the Train by Kurlitz. This story is not about a ghost or an encounter with a creepy stranger. It's not even about a near-death experience or something like that, as a matter of fact. I was never in danger during the event I'm about to tell you. Nonetheless, it's a disturbing memory that I will carry with me until the day I die. I grew up in a small city, the kind of place you could barely call a town, if it wasn't for the sheer number of people living there. Downtown was only a couple of blocks long, and in the middle of it was one of the biggest buildings in the area. It was the local movie theater named after the city. I remember I was going there when I was very young, about 7 years old, and watching the first Pokemon movie. It was probably nothing compared to the theaters we have nowadays, but back then it was huge for me. I loved it. So when a few years later I heard the cinema was going out of business, I felt really sad about it. The building was sold to a religious group that used it for their services. You know the type: loud music, big crowds with their arms in the air singing prayers, some having seizures on stage while the pastor yells through a mic. Every time I walked past the old cinema, I would see the announcements of the congregation where the movie posters would have been. And if they were in session, you could hear them singing from the other side of the street. This group owned the cinema for nearly a decade until the local government bought back the building in order to restore it to a historic landmark of the city. When this happened, I was studying construction with the intent to follow architecture or civil engineering at college, and my class was very lucky to be involved with the cinema's restoration project because two of our teachers were architects working on it. I will always remember the day we went to visit the old cinema. Our class was small, only a handful of students, but we were all around the same age, so we all shared childhood memories of when the cinema was operational. We ran through the corridors of the auditorium, sat in the chairs just like we did when we were little kids, and began stomping on the wooden floors with our feet, filling the entire room with echoes of our drumming and our laughters. A little ritual of sorts everyone used to do right before the beginning of the movie. Once nostalgia time was over, we went back to the purpose of the trip and began to survey the building. We were very excited because this was a unique opportunity to go into places we would never have been allowed to otherwise. So we made sure to check every last corner, every single room, no matter how far, no matter how obscure. The first one we found was below the stage. On one of the corners, there was a little door, not very visible, probably because it was meant for maintenance staff only. Behind it, we found a long room filled with rusty boilers. Part of the old heating system was no longer in use. The place was a little creepy, with all those old tanks and pipes crowding the narrow space, but what we found past them was what really started to freak us out. This room was small, very small. It was, after all, basically just leftover space behind the boilers, yet it contrasted so much with the rest of the area around it, it may as well have been from a different place altogether. The walls were painted a light color, white, I think, but I don't remember it very well because what really got my attention were the drawings in them. There were rainbows, a smiling sun, trees and flowers, and happy little people with smiles on their faces of dotted eyes. It was a daycare. The whole class and teacher gathered to see the discovery. We were all very confused about the strange placing of this room. Okay, we could understand the need for a place to keep the kids that were too little to be amongst the crowd during prayers, or maybe the ones of the people who worked there, but the placing was just odd. The stage was probably one of the loudest places in the auditorium during services, and this was right below it, so there was no way it could be a quiet place for children. We left the boiler room and continued our tour through the theater, a little puzzled about our finding but not giving it too much thought. Outside of the auditorium, there were bathrooms, both in terrible condition, the ticket sale booth, and a huge set of stairs that led to a mezzanine in the auditorium. Half of the seats there were totally ruined due to a water leak in the roof, and I cursed these people for not taking proper care of the building. With that part done, all that was left was the projection room on the third floor. Behind the tickets booth, there was a door that led to a spiral staircase. I don't remember how tall it actually was, but it must have been over 10 meters of metallic steps without a single resting spot. I wasn't exactly an athlete, but I could walk several kilometers with no problem, and rode on a bike to and from school every single day. Yet by the time I reached the top of the stairs, I was exhausted. And I wasn't the only one. All of my classmates complained about how hard it was to walk up there. After a short break to catch our breath, we moved on to explore the third floor. It was roughly a narrow passageway with a couple of divisions to form different rooms, but it was more than enough for what it was made for. The first room from the stairs was a storage deposit, probably where they kept the movies and other equipment, and except for some trash, it was mostly empty. The second room was the one we were all excited to see, the projector room. The old machine was so big that it was still there, and there were even some pieces scattered around. It was quite a piece of history, and we were all very thrilled to check it out, so no one really bothered to move on to the very last room until we were about to leave. And there we saw it again. There was a train in this one instead of a rainbow. Something was written on it in big, colorful letters. Something about Christ. I can't remember it well. The drawings were a bit old, the paint slightly peeled from the walls, but the colors were just as cheerful as you would expect for a place where children would play. My heart sank to my stomach as I came to the realization of what this place really was. The one behind the boilers probably serving the same purpose. I took notice of how isolated the room was. Literally the furthest away you could possibly get from everyone else. I thought about the 3 floors of stairs and imagined what it would have been like to a child to walk all the way up, only to end up in that room, the room with a colorful train in the wall. My classmates and I exchanged horrified expressions as I knew they were thinking the same. We never visited the theater again, even though we continued with the restoration project for several months, and we never talked about those 2 rooms. Cases of molestation in the church are well known by everyone, to the point that the pedo priest is practically a cliche. But this is the kind of thing you think happens in some place far away, in another city, even in another country. You never imagine it can happen in the same town you live, the place where you grew up, in the very same building where you once watched a Pokemon movie when you were 7 years old.
Oh, gosh.
All right, we'd like to thank you for listening to our podcast tonight. Going forward from here, we've created an email called strangeandundecided@gmail.com. If you have any stories you want us to look at or want us to read on our podcast, send us an email and we'll consider that for the show. So once again, thank you.
And good night.